Steelers GM Omar Khan says he's open to trading for a center. What that means for the NFL draft plans and 3 new free agents being signed, all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. That's on the Game Time app. More on them later. All right, Steelers fans, let's get into some stuff that we heard more from owners' meetings as those continue right now. The Steelers continue to be asked and field questions about the center position, which is one of the positions that was deemed to be a very important need that hasn't been addressed yet. And, Mike Tomlin, we talked about this on the Monday episode. Mike Tomlin threw it out there that, the Steelers, they've got Nate Herbig on their roster, but they've got work to do there. So, yeah, you have work to do there if Nate Herbig's your only option at center, who you wouldn't even put in at center when Mason Cole was struggling last year. So, the Pittsburgh media got a chance to talk to Omar Khan, and he had some interesting insight into this, and he kind of threw out something that at least opened the door to at least another conversation about how the Steelers address this very important problem they're facing right now. And Omar Khan, when talking about center, said, quote, all options that are still on the table. There are still some players out there who are free agents. There might be some trade opportunities, and then there's the draft. But we have Herbig, as I mentioned to you guys in Indy, and we have some offensive linemen that have some versatility, and I didn't see how Coach T described it, but there's still a lot of time between now and Latrobe. Okay, so the other person who has versatility on the Steelers offensive line is James Daniels. We still haven't heard them once say that would be a move, so I don't think that that's actually going to happen. I think this is the Steelers biding their time and just being kind of like, hey, I'm going to answer this question because I don't have a good answer for this question. We're just going to say this now until we make the move to figure out what we're doing at center. So the draft options, we've gone over a lot of this show. Jackson Powers-Johnson out of Oregon, Zach Frazier out of West Virginia, Cedric Van Pran out of Georgia. And if you wait even longer, maybe you're looking at like Bo Limmer out of Arkansas. Or if you want to transition Graham Barton from Duke to center, that's also something you can do. But those are all the draft options. And then free agency, I mean, we've talked about this. There aren't that many like good free agency options right now. Brian Allen, Nick Gates are the guys that ring the loudest there. So that being said, what would be the Steelers' trade options there? And I think that's where it's kind of interesting to look at. If the Steelers are open for trading for a center, who would they get and how would they pull that off? Now, at least in my studying of the NFL, teams just don't give up starting centers. Like you're not going to go, hey, Lions want to cuff up Frank Ragnow. That's not going to happen. No team. If you found your starting center, you are rolling with your starting center because that is a key position. And once you get that, and you hold on to that for as long as you need to. And I think that's just not something that the Steelers are going to be able to do. So if you look at starting centers, that's not going to happen. So you look at backup centers or teams that have multiple centers on their roster who they're paying veteran contracts for and are also hurting at the salary cap position. So I looked over options like that for if a trade would work, and there were 2 teams that I came up with that that would work for that scenario, or will at least fit that specific scenario. I'm not saying that they would specifically work for the Steelers, and I'll explain why one's more likely than the other. And these are just me. These are not me saying these are going to happen. I'm not saying I have a source here, but this is me scouring the NFL, looking at rosters, looking at salary caps, looking at options, and saying, hey, these are the people that meet that meet the criteria the Steelers are looking for. So 2 teams here. One, you look at I look at teams that are hurting the most in salary cap. One team is the Browns. According to Over the Cap, they have one of the lowest salary cap situations right now, and they do have a veteran center who they're paying in Ethan Posich. His contract is a total of $18 million, but he's a $3.4 million hit. I just don't think that the Browns would part with a guy like that, and let alone send him to the Steelers to a position of need for their division rival. So like throw that one out. But like, that's the idea of like a guy who they're paying veteran money for. He also is going to make more money next year for them. And he's on the books for a decent amount of money after that. But that's an example of like, what that would be like. Now, I looked at other teams, and a lot of the other teams either had a center that you really didn't want in the first place, or they were just, not centers that they would probably give up for a trade right now. And so the only other team that I thought made sense as a trade partner for a center, and maybe I'm missing someone here, but the one that rang out to me the most was Liam Eichenberg of the Miami Dolphins. Now, why the Dolphins? Well, the Dolphins, they have some salary cap space. They have about like 10-ish million, I think, and they do have some wiggle room, but they just signed Aaron Brewer, who was one of the free agents that we were talking about. He's going to come in and he's presumably going to be the starter over Liam Eichenberg. Liam Eichenberg is a guy who was drafted in the second round back in 2021, hasn't totally worked out, and hasn't exactly been the greatest. Like, for example, last year he had like 7 penalties called against him, and what wasn't the best as far as centers go. But he's a veteran and he can help you there. He did give up 5 sacks last year, 2 sacks the year before that, 9 sacks as a rookie way back then. So I mean, I guess he's improved since then. But he would be one of those options where he's a veteran. He's made multiple starts. You could see him fitting in and at least giving you a steady presence at center, kind of like what Mason Cole did, because they couldn't find any of the option there. But here's the thing. How does that change the NFL draft plans? To me, it further prioritizes that they need to get a starting center, or if it might put them in a position where if they're like, hey, we couldn't get Jackson Powers Johnson or Zach Frazier. So what are we going to do? We're going to go get Cedric Van Pran. Well, Cedric Van Pran's another guy I think that could start. But we're going to get Bo Limmer, and we're going to just develop him and see how he works and see when he becomes available, and if we can turn him into a starter that we didn't spend a high draft pick on. But I think that's all a trade really means for the Steelers right now, is that they're going, that sets them up to go into the draft where if they don't get one of the top guys, as Mike Tomlin said, they only perceive a few of the centers to be starting, plug and play type starter guys in this draft class. If they don't get one of those guys and they trade for a Liam Eichenberg type, it would simply mean that whoever they draft, if they don't get one of those top 3 guys there, that they're going to be able to be a backup because the Steelers have a veteran on the roster who can play center and just not be a major liability to the offense. And that's what they got to hope would be the situation there. But to me, this is all just a sign that the Steelers really need to make sure that they hone in and get the right draft pick at center, which is something I've been talking about a lot. We talked about this for a few years. I used to talk about Tyler Linderbaum was a target that they should be looking at. We were talking about this last year a little bit. Now we're still here talking about it this year. I think the Steelers, even if they trade for a guy, center needs to be a top priority. And I know that they got plenty of priorities right now. They want to get a top premier tackle or a top premier corner. They want a day 2 wide receiver, but somewhere center's got to fit into this spot and fit in early. They cannot play around and get another mid-level to bad center and just hope for the best there with that player and a Liam Eichenberg type. So all that being said, I think the Steelers being in the situation where they have to trade for center, it means they weren't able to get that done. They got a lot of other things done. They got a new linebacker. They got a whole new quarterback room. They made some trades here and there, but center is still a position that they absolutely need to address. They need to stop playing around with it and go get some real answers at the position. We'll see what Omar Khan has in store moving forward. But we got to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about 3 new free agents the Steelers have signed, what they mean and how they could fit into the team. That, and also how the receiver that the Steelers signed could impact their draft plans. All here and more on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you, this show is brought to you by Game Time. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets to all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. You get killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, which can't be beat, so you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you're about to have. Go download the Game Time app right now. Go to their website, gametime.co. But if you download the Game Time app, you can look at it right on your phone. You can even get tickets up to the last minute of the event that you're looking at, or even up to an hour after it started if you're running behind. So go to Game Time right now. Look at the option to buy tickets, and when you're buying tickets, you'll see the actual view from the seat that you're getting for the event that you're going to through Game Time, so that you know you're not getting scammed while you are getting the best price. And again, the best price guarantee means that they're planning to give you the best price. And if you find that there's a better price somewhere else, Game Time challenges you, say, hey, bring it on. If you find the tickets in the same section and row for less somewhere else, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference of those prices. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase, or go to their website, gametime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our discussion here. Now we flow to free agency. I didn't make this the lead topic because I felt like the trade thing was a little bit more of a talking point, because all of these signings as veterans, they aren't, needle movers. They're guys that fill out the depth chart and give you options down the line. So let's go over a few of them. Let's first talk about the quarterback that they signed, Kyle Allen, who's been on his 14. This is his 15 in the NFL. 28-year-old quarterback, 6'3", a traditional backup, a guy who's made 19 starts in his career, 7-12 in those starts, has thrown 26 touchdowns, 21 interceptions in those span. Purely a backup quarterback, purely a third stringer behind Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. Just another guy to come in and say, hey, learn the offense, don't make mistakes. And honestly, I think this will be the competition for if the Steelers draft a day 3 quarterback. I don't perceive them drafting a day 1 or day 2 quarterback this year, but say they get like a Joe Milton type of quarterback in the draft, it'll be like, hey, your job is to beat that guy, Kyle Allen, at the end of the list. I think that's really all what Kyle Allen does there for that picture. Another guy there is Quez Watkins. And I thought Quez Watkins was an interesting signing here, because he's more of a slot receiver who doesn't have a whole lot of production in his career. You look at his career with the Eagles. He was with the Eagles for 4 years. He was a 6th round pick back in the 2020 draft. They just now let hit free agency. Best year he ever had numbers wise was 2021, when he had 43 catches for 647 yards, and a touchdown. Did have a 91-yard touchdown that year. So good stuff there. But I think what he mainly brings to the table is he's a returner. He can get some returns in. He's had some decent averages at different points in his career. He had 8 kick returns back in 2021 that averaged about 17.3-ish yards per return there. So those aren't bad. But what is Quez Watkins? He's another low level, coming in to fill out the bottom of the depth chart of the receiving group. This does not change the Steelers' need to get a top wide receiver right now for this offense. Right now, honestly, if I'm looking at the Steelers' depth chart right now, it's George Pickens. And then you're still looking at, a Calvin Austin type, even if you're looking there, Van Jefferson, and now Quez Watkins, fits into that picture there as well. But, I guess Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin, those are your second and third wide receivers behind George Pickens. You need more options. And you got Marquez Callaway, but he's very much like Quez Watkins, very much like Van Jefferson. I'd say Van Jefferson is the higher grade of those three, but it still puts the Steelers in a position where they need to draft a wide receiver this year. And I think that's something that we'll get more to in the next segment here. But to me, Quez Watkins, at best he's a solid slot for you if he develops into that for you, and then maybe he gives you some special teams help with returns, but not exactly a move that's going to move the needle there as far as their needs on offense. That doesn't really do much for that there. But the other guy there, which could be interesting, is Dean Lowry. Now, Dean Lowry is a defensive lineman coming from the Vikings. He also played for the Packers, and he comes with plenty of NFL experience. This is a guy who's had 84 starts in his career. He's been in the NFL for 8 years. I think that this is probably the more potential impactful signing. He's a guy who's 6'6", 290-ish, almost 300 pounds. He can be a guy who can come in, help out the D-line, give them some depth, not a game changer, but be a rotational guy on the defensive line to help them out there. That's what I think the biggest signing that they made yesterday when it came to the Steelers free agent moves, unless there's another move that's happened since then. Apologies if there was, and I didn't get this out, and that I didn't get an emergency episode on time. As I said before, yesterday was my birthday, so I was trying to enjoy some of it. But looking at these three here, I think Dean Lowry, just because of his NFL experience, he's going to be a guy that you can look at and say, all right, come in, help out. You're with the rotation with let's say that Keanu Benton becomes a starter next to Cam Hayward this year, and you need a rotation guy for next to Larry Ogunjobi. That's where I think that he fits in there. The Steelers also re-signed Montravius Lloyd. So I look at those options. This makes it so that they don't got to worry about an Isaiah Loudermilk or any guys like that. They need to go get guys that can contribute, and Dean Lowry brings NFL experience to contribute there. And that's where I think the biggest thing the Steelers are going to get out of these three signings. Now, again, who knows about Quez Watkins and how he'll be used, and who knows what else this is signing up. I think these are just more the Steelers shoring up their assets and resources before the draft so that they can say, hey, like if we needed to go to war right now, we'd have at least a roster that would be capable of doing so going into the NFL draft. And again, the strength of that is to give yourself a chance to be less obvious with the direction that you're going to head in the NFL draft. And that's where you want to be. That's what you want to be in a position where people can't predict you. So that way, if teams think that if teams can assume all they want, but if they don't know for sure based off of your roster construction what you want, it's a little bit harder for them to gamble to trade ahead of you to go get the player that you think or that they think that you need, when that's might not be a player that you were looking at all. But when you're in a position like where you desperately need a starting corner and you're sitting there in the first round and only a few corners left, teams are going to say, hey, we got to get ahead of the Steelers. That's what the Steelers want to avoid. They want to be put in a position where they're able to get to work from a place of power. And I think that's where trading for a center might help them do, but also they're trying to do that with some of these late free agent signings that are more depth pieces than anything else. So there's a lot to break down there. We'll keep doing that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We got to talk about the Steelers draft plans at wide receiver, because to me, I've been banging the drum that so far the Steelers have given really big signs about what their real plans are at the wide receiver position in this NFL draft. And to me, all that's happened is that those drums are now just going to be a lot louder with the moves that they've made recently at the wide receiver position. We'll address that and more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook is the #1 sportsbook in America. Right now, you can say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. The first 2 rounds are over, but if you're ready to get into the action, maybe because your bracket's not doing so well, mine is doing pretty well. I picked UConn to win it all. But if you're betting on a big upset or on a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook, and that's FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 back in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. That's $200 that you can use on point spreads, money lines, and even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon for new customers to get $200 back in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. And that's on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our discussion here on this Tuesday episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. So let's get into where I think the Steelers are actually headed at wide receiver right now, because let's be real, it's not looking great at this position. George Pickens, awesome, and Calvin Austin, potential you see there, but Van Jefferson, Quez Watkins, Marcus Callaway, not inspiring a whole lot of playmaking threat there. They also have Denzel Mims and Des Fitzpatrick. I apologize. But, if for those who might think I'm forgetting them. But being serious, the Steelers need another playmaker at wide receiver. And they could go get a Tyler Boyd. But even if they signed a Tyler Boyd, which, I was expecting that to be the next wide receiver they signed, not a Quez Watkins. But even if they signed a Tyler Boyd, they would still need to draft a wide receiver early. And this is signaling more to me that it is very much in their plans to draft one early. And, I've entertained the notion of drafting one in the first round, but now it's really putting me in a position where I'm thinking like that might actually be the move here if they think that the value's there. Now, the tricky thing about this is that there are plenty of receivers I think are worthy of first round. I think there's 6 first round wide receivers in this draft class, in my opinion. That there's the top of the guys who the Steelers have to trade up to get, and there's no way they're getting Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Romeo Dunze. That ain't happening. Those guys are too talented. Those guys are going to go top 10, maybe even top 7 in the draft. They might, they won't. There's no way the Steelers are going to get in those guys. But who they could get are the bottom 3 wide receivers in the first round. And that's Ladd McConkey out of Georgia. That's Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU. And that's Adonai Mitchell out of Texas. Now, I've told you before, if I was to pick one of those 3, Adonai Mitchell would be my guy. He's 6'4", he flies, he's got great route running ability, he's got great size, can go up and get the ball. I think that he has the best chance to be the complete wide receiver. Brian Thomas Jr. can fly, not as good of a route runner, but he's more of like a Martavis Bryant type if you're looking for that, and that could be a really interesting addition to your offense. But the best route runner of those 3 is Ladd McConkey, and that could be the interesting guy to get here if you look at the skill set they add, because remember the Steelers, when they traded away Deontay Johnson, I said the biggest thing is, hey, they still need a route runner type receiver on this offense, a guy that's going to naturally just be sharp in how he gets open and create space in tight situations against good cornerbacks. And I think that's who Ladd McConkey is more than the other 2 guys. Now, I think Adonai Mitchell has the best combination of what these 3 have to offer, as far as Brian Thomas and Ladd McConkey. Like, he has really good route running. He has size and speed like Brian Thomas. So that's why I like him the best. I think he's the complete picture out of those 3. But I think if the Steelers got any of those 3, they'd have an exciting playmaker next to George Pickens, and a person that kind of prevents defenses from saying, okay, we have to just devote all of our attention to taking away George Pickens, because then you'd have 2 wide receivers that could be playmakers. Then you'd still have Pat Freiermuth, and then you still have a run game that you're expecting to be an upgrade this year. But let's say they don't get one of those first round wide receivers. Who could they get in the second round? Now, I've told you all time and time again, Roman Wilson is my guy in this draft. If they find a way to get Roman Wilson, I think that they've scored big. I think that he is a talented wide receiver. He's a great route runner. He did great at the Senior Bowl. He's shown great tape. I think he can be that dude. And if Roman Wilson's gotten in the second round, Steelers fan, do some dances, because I think he's going to be a guy that you buy jerseys for very soon, because he's going to make a lot of plays. There's also Troy Franklin. I'm less of a Troy Franklin guy. I think that he's really talented, but I think that his skill set isn't the same as what I like out of Roman Wilson. I do like Ricky Pearsall out of Florida. I think that he can be a guy that can be tough and a good fit for the Steelers. I'm not a big Keon Coleman guy. I'm sorry, but I want more speed in the game. Now, granted, he could end up being a big name player, and there's certain guys that don't need elite speed or anything like that. But I think that that's the guy that they can afford to pass on. And other 2 guys that I really think could be great fits for the Steelers that might even be able to wait on past the second round based off of where they're valued is a guy I've talked about and was included in our Mock Draft Monday episode, Javon Baker out of Central Florida, 6'1", 208. Has done a decent job being a good product, and I think that he possesses a lot of the good things that you want out of a wide receiver to be. But a guy that I think is a great fit, and also who Zach Azzedine, the Steelers' new wide receivers coach, visited in his pro day on Monday, was Malachi Corley of Western Kentucky. And I love his ability to get into his routes. I love how sharp he is. He's 5'11", he's 210, he runs well. I think Malachi Corley could be that sweet spot wide receiver where if the Steelers get him in the third round, that could be the perfect value for a guy who comes in, contributes early, and is a solid number 2 across from George Pickens, while they also have Van Jefferson and Quez Watkins and all those guys, Calvin Austin and all the guys there. But that's where I think it happens there. We talked about Brendan Rice, as an option there, but I think that he still ranks below necessarily a Malachi Corley. But I think once you get past the Malachi Corleys, like there's other talented guys, make no mistake, like Malik Washington out of Virginia, I think is another good player. But I don't think that he's a number 2. I think that that's when you start dipping into the number 3 options here in this draft class. But again, that's a lot of names that we just named that would be like hits for getting a number 2 wide receiver right now in this draft class. Again, in the first round, you got 6 players who I think could end up being number 1s in the NFL, but the bottom 3, of course, could start as number 2s and develop into number 1s over time. Then in the second round, you got multiple options who I think could work for you. There's, Xavier Leggett's still a good option. Xavier Worthy, still a good option. But I think for value wise, if they were able to find a way to snag Baker or Corley in the third round, that would be a solid addition to the wide receiver room. But again, at wide receiver right now, when you're not adding Deontay Johnson, when you're sending away Deontay Johnson, and you're only adding low level, small pickups in free agency, you're putting yourself in the position to need a big name, a big player who's going to help the offense there. And I think that's where this draft class could be great for them, is that they have a lot of options there for players like that. I just don't know if that's going to be the best move for the Steelers right now, with the needs that they have at center, the needs they have offensive tackle, and the needs they have at corner, and wide receivers also a need. But with the strength that this team wants to lean on, running the ball, possessing the ball, moving the chains, and playing great defense, wide receiver is not that high up in those priorities there. Now, it's still a priority. You still want playmaker wide receivers. You still want talent. But I just think that as far as first round pick goes, I think the Steelers could stand to wait there and buy themselves a little more time, get another pick position there. But if the second and third round, and remember they now have 2 third-round picks, that could be the sweet spot to get a wide receiver in this draft class and still have the draft capital to address other key situations for the Steelers. So with all that being said, I look at this draft class and I look at what the Steelers they're making. It's just screaming to me that one of these high draft picks are going to wide receiver. We just have to see if it's going to be the first, second, or third round, and how high it is, and who they get in those rounds, because that could be a big determiner of what this offense looks like. It might be the final determiner of what this offense looks like going into OTAs and eventually training camp with the weapons they have on hand for Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. But that's a show for here today on your Tuesday Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, or on your favorite podcasting, on YouTube, or on your favorite podcasting apps. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes. We're back tomorrow with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.